Okay, so let's unpack this. Imagine, waking up, but it's not your alarm clock. It's pain. Like a persistent ache, maybe a tightness, this pressure that feels, well, heavy, really immovable.
Yeah.
And we're so used to just slapping a label on it, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Muscle strain, slept funny, too much screen time. We often just dismiss it almost automatically. Tell ourselves, it's nothing. Just stress, just overwork, just life.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is the idea of not accepting that dismissal. The material we've looked at, it suggests the physical body isn't just a container for our conscious life, not just temporary. It's actually more like a precise historical archive. It holds the record, you see, of every emotional shock, every feeling we didn't express, every difficult truth the conscious mind has, worked pretty desperately, almost surgically, to forget.
So our mission today really is to dig into this radical idea. It goes way back, late 19th century stuff. The idea that our physical symptoms, our illnesses, they aren't just random, not just mechanical failures in some biological machine. Instead, they're literal translations, like the body speaking a foreign language, a language made up of forbidden desire, buried rage, unspeakable shame, stuff the rational mind just refuses to hear directly.
Exactly. The body, in essence, it becomes the ultimate truth teller, especially when the mind is, let's say, lying most effectively to itself. So we really want you, the listener, to approach this deep dive, not just as, a medical discussion, but more like an act of translation, of decoding.
Right. So as we go through this, maybe keep this question in mind. When your shoulder locks up, say, the morning before that difficult family meeting you have to go to, or your stomach just knots itself into a vice every single Sunday evening, what specific message is your unconscious trying to, broadcast, using the language of the flesh?
And this whole exploration, historically speaking, it really starts with those early observations of what used to be called hysteria, clinically termed that way. This whole constellation of physical symptoms, paralysis, mutism, things that just defied any known neurological explanation at the time. But when people like Freud and Breuer started really listening deeply to patients think Anna O or Dora, they found something critical. The symptoms weren't arbitrary at all. They were specifically linked to these highly charged, often forgotten emotional events.
That's just, it's an incredibly powerful discovery, isn't it? The body wasn't just failing or breaking down, it was communicating, maybe in a distorted way, sure, but communicating nonetheless. So the body becomes this kind of stage. And the repressed stuff, all the unwanted feelings the person finds unbearable, performs its desperate monologue, as the source puts it. For an audience, maybe the analyst who finally agrees to listen and try to interpret.
Precisely. And that analytical breakthrough, it led straight to Freud's key concept, conversion. It's this critical process where unbearable psychic conflict, something maybe morally unacceptable to the ego, gets transformed, turned into a bodily expression. Imagine the mind thinking, I have this huge psychological debt, maybe intense hatred for someone I'm supposed to love, and my morals forbid me from even acknowledging it. So it solves the immediate crisis by basically handing that weight, that conflict, over to the physical body, saying effectively, you deal with the stress, I can't handle the feeling.
And the body just obliges. In the form of paralysis or those debilitating aches, maybe numbness or just persistent nagging pain. Okay, let's make this really concrete. There's that story we found about the successful man, late 30s. He has the career, the partner, looks the part. But every morning he wakes up with this searing, unexplained pain in his left arm. Cardiologists find absolutely nothing. Scans are totally pristine. And the official medical verdict ends up being often psychosomatic, which, let's be honest, often sounds like a dismissal, doesn't it? As if the pain isn't quite real.
But the conflict is intensely real. It's housed in the history of the psyche. It's not something you can detect with typical biological scans. Now, this particular man, he was apparently highly articulate, very controlled, deeply resistant to the idea that anything might be, amiss in his emotional life. He only mentioned the exact start of the pain 3 weeks after his father's birthday dinner because the analyst really pressed him for clear chronological history of the symptom.
Okay, and the crucial event at that dinner, it seems so warm and casual. His father says, "You've done well, son. Better than I ever did." He smiles back. Everyone applauds. A nice moment of, fatherly pride. But hang on a second. I have to play devil's advocate here, just for the listener. Most sons, hearing that, would probably take it as pure affirmation, right? Pure pride. So how do we, or how does the analyst, jump from that seemingly benign statement to this really radical interpretation that the pain is a reaction to feeling betrayed? Isn't there a risk of just, connecting any recent pain to the nearest emotional event and saying, aha, that's the cause? Where's the line between interpretation and, just assuming?
That is absolutely the essential challenge, and it's why analysis is, frankly, quite arduous. It's not about making a simple, neat causal link like A caused B. No, it requires hours and hours of listening to the patient's free associations, their dreams, those subtle shifts in how they talk or hold themselves. In the specific case, the man kept circling back to this intense feeling of unease right after the compliment, a feeling that totally contradicted his conscious pride. So the compliment, when you translate it from the father's language, simple affection, maybe into the son's unconscious language of identity, it carried this hidden, crushing verdict. You finally surpassed me, and in doing that, you've kind of killed off the need for me. It wasn't just praise. It felt like an acknowledgement of his father's own obsolescence.
Wow. Okay, that is a monumental weight to carry. So the successful son realizes, or rather feels unconsciously, that his achievement is like patricide. The symbolic murder of his father's relevance, his significance, and he just cannot tolerate feeling hatred or even resentment for the man he's supposed to revere, culturally obliged to.
Exactly. That unacknowledged, completely unacceptable conflict, the love mixed with this repressed guilt about surpassing and maybe betraying his father, it had to go somewhere. It converted. And the arm, the exact physical spot where the father clapped him, where the weight of that praise was physically laid, that's where the pain manifested.
So the arm is screaming the truth. The mouth can't speak. The symptom's message is pretty clear then. I can't bear the burden of this success, or maybe I can't tolerate the shame that comes with his touch, his approval. The pain is like the punishment the unconscious deals out for this act of successful betrayal. It's a very precise, symbolic, physical choreography.
And that precision is absolutely key. The pain isn't random, it's psychodynamics playing out in the body.
Okay, so that takes us from the what conversion to the how. How does the mind actually perform this complex choreography, this process that ends up creating such a specific physical symptom? Let's go a bit deeper into the engine room of the symptom, so to speak.
Right. We're looking now at the core defense mechanism, which is repression. And it's really vital to distinguish this from just, simple forgetting. The sources are clear. Repression isn't passive. It's described as active, violent, continuous labor. Imagine the ego like a fortress guard, standing permanently at the gates of your consciousness. The conflict, the memory, the unacceptable desire, maybe pure destructive rage, it tries to cross the threshold, but the ego just says, nope, you are morally corrosive. You are denied entry.
And the mind uses up continuous psychic energy, just holding that door shut, using other defenses too, like denial or rationalization, to keep up this illusion of control, of moral purity. But like you said earlier, the repressed stuff, it doesn't just vanish. It's sealed away, yes, but it builds pressure over time.
It stays alive down there, it festers, and it actively seeks expression. So when the direct routes, conscious thoughts, saying it out loud, acting on it, are completely blocked by the ego censorship, the only available pathway left is this alternate route, through the body.
And here's where it gets really interesting, functionally speaking. The symptom itself, it's actually a kind of compromise formation. Is that right? Like the psyche is trying to meet two opposing, impossible demands at the same time. It needs to keep the repression going so the forbidden thought doesn't surface raw, but it also needs to let that thought surface just enough to relieve some of that built-up pressure.
Exactly. So the thought does surface, but only in code, in a distorted physical form. The symptom actually provides a kind of relief by shifting the anxiety, moving it from the psychological realm to the physical realm, which, ironically, is often easier for the person to tolerate and manage, even if it's painful.
Yeah, you can see that so clearly in those historical cases, like Frau Emmy von N, where her tics, those choking feelings, the sudden outbursts, they found they mapped exactly back to specific stifled memories or impulses she couldn't express. The physical reaction was literally the only way left for those emotional messages to get out.
And this raises a really important question, connecting this idea of compromise back to you, the listener, and just everyday life. Consider the woman who gets those sudden, debilitating migraines. Every single time she has to prepare for a visit to her mother. Neurologists treat the pain, obviously, but the migraines keep coming back with this clockwork predictability. Why? Because the migraine isn't actually the primary problem. In this view, it's a brilliant, brutal solution.
A solution. Okay, so what's the underlying conflict that the body is solving with a migraine?
Well, the required visit forces her right back onto a psychic battlefield. On one side, her adult self feels this immense duty, maybe guilt. She feels she must go. But on the other side, her nervous system still holds the imprint of the wounded child self. The part that remembers the mother's sharp, maybe emotionally annihilating criticisms. So for her, speaking up as an adult or refusing the visit outright feels like inviting catastrophe, massive guilt, or maybe complete emotional dissolution.
So the body steps in to prevent that annihilation.
Precisely. The migraine descends like a blackout curtain. Total sensory shutdown. It gets rid of light, sound, interaction, obligation. And crucially, it gets rid of the guilt. It provides an excuse that's socially acceptable. I can't possibly go, I'm physically incapacitated. And this shields her ego from having to confront that forbidden rage or maybe deep disappointment towards her parent. The physical pain, even though it's severe, is paradoxically safer than facing that emotional storm head-on.
Wow. So the symptom is basically saying, I will not go. And if I have to suffer, better this physical brokenness than being emotionally betrayed or overwhelmed. This pattern, it sounds like what's called the return of the repressed. The unconscious is patient, isn't it? It waits for defenses to be low during stress, holidays, anniversaries, maybe moments of intimacy, and then it rises. Not usually as a direct memory, but wearing the mask of a symbolic illness.
And it's crucial to remember every single twitch, ache, collapse we're talking about, it's likely overdetermined. That's the term we use. Meaning it's woven from multiple conflicts, multiple psychological processes, not just one simple cause and effect. So just treating the symptom, just trying to make the pain go away without trying to interpret the deeper text. It's like silencing the messenger without ever bothering to read the letter they're carrying.
Okay, so repression is the foundation, but you're saying the unconscious has a whole architectural arsenal. For managing conflict, let's look at a couple other powerful mechanisms that can generate physical pain. Starting with how the mind deals with aggression. You mentioned projection, and then turning that aggression inward.
Yes. So when an impulse feels too destructive or maybe just morally intolerable for the ego to own, let's say intense rage or jealousy towards someone we're supposed to love, the defensive projection often kicks in. We deny that unacceptable feeling in ourselves, and instead we attribute it to the outside world. To the other person, we think or say, it's not me who feels hostile, it's you who's constantly being aggressive and angry towards me.
Right. That sounds like a pretty effective way to get unbearable internal pressure outside of yourself. But what happens if that aggressive energy is really strong, really pervasive? Where does it go if the projection doesn't quite work, or maybe the other person just denies being hostile?
Well, the material suggests that the rage, having been sort of mobilized and then essentially rejected by the external target, it turns violently inward. The body itself becomes the battlefield where this unacknowledged aggression wages war against the self. And this internal violence can manifest physically. Things like generalized inflammation, those debilitating chronic pain syndromes, or even autoimmune responses where the body attacks itself.
So the body literally takes the hit. For the conflict, the mind refuses to own.
Yes, one source describes this powerfully as, the shadow of the object fell upon the ego. The conflict is still very real, but the target has shifted. The internal self ends up being punished by the aggressive energy that the ego couldn't bear to acknowledge as its own.
Okay, now let's bring in another really fascinating mechanism, one that often shows up physically: reaction formation. This is when the ego handles a totally unacceptable impulse by consciously embracing the exact opposite behavior or feeling, right?
Yes, it's very much a performance defense. If the unconscious thought is, let's say, I really resent my colleague's success and secretly wish they'd fail, the conscious reaction formation might be to become excessively helpful, over-the-top, complimentary, almost, sycophantic towards that very colleague. You're performing this exaggerated love or care specifically to cover up the unacceptable hatred or contempt boiling underneath.
So if you secretly hate someone, you become almost sickeningly sweet to them. Okay. How does the body translate the intense strain of keeping up that lie?
Well, it creates this state of chronic inner tension, this cognitive dissonance that has to be physically managed somehow. You're actively trying to suppress, to literally swallow the true bitter emotion. And so common physical manifestations of really strong reaction formation often involve the digestive system or the throat. We might see unexplained nausea, constant stomach upset, acid reflux, or that perpetual feeling of having something stuck like a lump in the throat that just won't go down. The body is reacting physically to the immense effort required to maintain the external performance, the lie.
That constant swallowing of the truth. Wow. Okay, this brings us back to that idea of the symptom as a kind of public spectacle. Let's look at that story of the young artist, the one who was blocked for, 18 months, and developed that persistent, mysterious rash across her chest and shoulders.
Yes, she was essentially frozen creatively. She was struggling under this enormous, though silent, legacy of her father, a renowned, now retired painter. She would insist, quite offensively actually, oh, he never pressured me, he was always so supportive. But her internal reality was one of complete paralysis. To even try to create felt like inviting his ghost back into the studio to judge her work.
And the rash itself, it appeared in a very specific place. It wasn't just anywhere on her body.
No, absolutely not. The rash bloomed precisely on those parts of her body that felt most physically invaded during her childhood art lessons. Where his hands would rest when he leaned over her shoulder to correct her brushstrokes. Where she felt his breath on her neck as he whispered, "No, not like that, like this." That whole physical area became the repository for decades of implied judgment, of silent expectation.
So the symbolic message, literally written across her skin, seems intensely clear. Her body is creating a physical barrier, a defense. It's effectively saying, keep your hands off. I will not be touched by your influence, by your legacy.
And the symptom, the rash, it achieved multiple defensive goals at once. It physically prevented her from returning to the studio, so she avoided the painful judgment. And it created a situation where she couldn't be judged by others for her failure to produce work, only pitied, perhaps, for her baffling illness. Her unconscious essentially calculated that being sick was safer than risking the emotional annihilation of potential professional failure under her father's immense shadow. She would rather be, as the source puts it, diseased than derivative. The rash becomes her spectacular, albeit painful, rebellion.
Okay, it feels important to pause here for some critical thinking. This psychoanalytic lens is incredibly compelling, really powerful. But the skeptical listener might still be thinking, okay, this sounds a bit extreme. Surely not every illness is psychological.
We need to address that balance, don't we? If someone develops, say, diabetes or gets a straightforward viral infection, is psychoanalysis really claiming they just repressed a memory that somehow caused the bacteria or the insulin issue? That's the absolutely essential boundary we need to draw clearly. Psychoanalysis does not deny biology, not at all. We fully acknowledge that genetics, viruses, environmental factors, these are real fundamental aspects of illness. The crucial distinction lies in the question we ask. We move away from the purely deterministic biological question, what caused this, and we add layers of context. Why this specific illness? Why did it manifest right now? Why in this particular part of the body? Why in this particular person?
So it's the timing, the location, the meaning, those provide the map for the analysis.
Absolutely. Think about it. Two people go through the exact same high-stress external event, let's say a massive corporate restructuring, lots of uncertainty. One person thrives on it, sharpens their focus, performs brilliantly. The other develops severe colitis or maybe crippling back pain that stops them working. Why? A completely different responses. The psychoanalytic perspective would suggest that the person who develops the somatic illness is likely translating a pre-existing, intense, and probably repressed conflict. Maybe a conflict about control or safety or dependency. And the stress of the external event just acts as the overwhelming trigger, the final straw that causes the ego's usual defenses to collapse.
So it's the personal symbolic meaning that the individual assigns to that external stressor. That's what determines the route the symptom takes, and maybe even the specific area of the body that gets targeted.
Precisely. And Freud's really immense contribution here was shifting the whole clinical focus, moving away from the purely medical question, what is wrong with you, which kind of implies a deficiency, something broken, towards the interpretive question, what is this symptom trying to tell you, which implies there's a message, a text, waiting to be decoded.
Okay, this brings us right back to you, the listener. If you feel that persistent tightness in your chest, maybe that inexplicable heaviness in your limbs or a numbness you just can't quite explain, your body has likely stepped up to communicate, often quite loudly actually, because your conscious mind has, for whatever reason, simply stopped listening.
And this whole phenomenon really rests on that foundational psychoanalytic principle, psychic determinism, the idea that nothing in the mind is truly accidental or superfluous or random, not a fleeting dream image, not a simple slip of the tongue, and certainly not a debilitating physical symptom. Beneath that curated surface of our rational adult self, the unconscious is, well, ancient, primal, relentless.
We like to hold on to the illusion that we're totally in control, don't we? That the ego is master in its own house, as Freud initially thought, before revising it. But this analysis really demonstrates the opposite sometimes. When the conscious mind fails to process or tolerate an unacceptable truth, the unconscious forces the truth out through the only channel left available, the language of the flesh.
So the body, in this view, isn't your enemy trying to sabotage you. Not at all. It's more like your unconscious, deeply loyal self, essentially writing you a letter. Using the urgent ink of nerves and hormones and pain, it remembers everything, all the desires, all the rages, all the conflicts that you might have spent decades trying to push away or forget.
So the analytical invitation isn't just to mask the pain, right? It's to actually sit down and try to read the letter. The next time your throat closes up, just before you have to give an uncomfortable answer.
Yeah.
Or maybe your back seizes when you're asked to take on yet another impossible obligation. Ask the symptom directly. What am I refusing to say right now? What forbidden emotion am I actively pushing down? What necessary, maybe foundational memory am I still running away from?
In this deep dive, it doesn't begin with the promise of an immediate cure. That's important. It begins with the necessity of often uncomfortable interpretation. True, lasting understanding often starts by confronting our own resistance to knowing and really listening to the relentless insistence of the symptom, its demand to finally, profoundly be heard.
So what does all this mean for someone just trying to navigate a genuinely difficult life? We've established that every physical event seen through this lens is likely overdetermined, woven from multiple conflicts the mind has found intolerable. Freud promised truth, didn't he? Not necessarily immediate physical comfort. But maybe that truth is often the only medicine the soul will ultimately accept.
And that truth demands attention. The symptom is patient, yes, but it will escalate if ignored. If you ignore the initial, maybe faint scribbling of the message, it will keep writing. In bigger letters, bolder ink, and often a more insistent, painful script. Until we're finally brave enough to sit down, take a deep, stabilizing breath, read the whole message, and actually turn toward the emotional pain to finally understand it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the psychodynamics of the body, where the truth of the soul can manifest in the language of the flesh. We really encourage you to reflect on that final thought today. What is the truth your deepest self might finally be ready to accept? And what might it currently be costing your body to keep that truth locked away?